Imagine opening a jar of peaches that was sealed 3 summers ago and finding them just as sweet, just as golden as the day they came off the tree. No refrigerator, no freezer, no electricity at all. Picture a whole room dug into the cool earth, lined floor to ceiling with food that will feed a family straight through the deepest, darkest part of winter. Picture smoked hams hanging from the rafters, crocks of butter that never spoil, and eggs kept fresh for 6 months in nothing but a bucket of water. This is not a story about the past. Right now, today, there are families living just a few miles from a modern grocery store who have never owned a refrigerator, and they eat better than most of us. The question is simple. How? How do you keep a year of food from going bad without a single wire, a single motor, a single cold machine humming in the corner? The answer has been sitting quietly in Amish country for over 100 years. And once you understand it, you will never look at your kitchen the same way again. Let me take you somewhere most people never get to see. Down a gravel lane, past the white farmhouse, past the barn and the clothesline strung with plain blue shirts. There is a life going on that has barely changed in a century. The people who live here are Amish, and one of the first things you notice if you ever step inside one of their homes is what is missing. There is no hum. You do not realize how much noise your own house makes until you stand in a kitchen that has none of it. No refrigerator cycling on and off. No freezer buzzing in the basement. Just quiet and the smell of bread, and a whole family that somehow eats fresh, wholesome food every single day of the year. Now, most of us have been taught that food safety begins and ends with the refrigerator. We were raised on it. If it is not cold, it will spoil, and if it spoils, it will make you sick. That is the rule we live by. So the idea of a family storing a full year of meat, milk, eggs, vegetables, and fruit with no cold machine anywhere sounds almost impossible. It sounds unsafe. But here is the truth that the Amish have never forgotten, and that the rest of us paid to forget the moment we plugged in our first icebox. Refrigeration is not the only way to keep food. It is just the easiest way to sell people something. For thousands of years, human beings kept food beautifully without a drop of electricity. They did not do it by luck. They did it with a handful of simple, powerful methods passed down from mother to daughter and father to son. The Amish still use every one of them. Let me walk you through them, one at a time, the way they were shown to me. It starts underground. If there is one secret at the very heart of the Amish Pantry, this is it. Behind almost every one of these farmhouses, there is a heavy wooden door set into a small hill, or a trap door in the kitchen floor with a ladder going down into the dark. This is the root cellar, and it is a genuinely brilliant piece of engineering, even though it looks like nothing more than a hole in the ground. Here is why it works. A few feet below the surface, the temperature of the earth stops swinging with the weather. It does not care if it is a scorching July afternoon or a freezing January night. Down there, the ground holds steady all year long, somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees. That is the exact range that slows down rot, keeps sprouting to a crawl, and holds vegetables in a kind of gentle sleep. A well-built root cellar is, in effect, a refrigerator that runs on nothing but dirt. No power bill, no moving parts, no repairs. Just the steady, patient cool of the earth itself. Step down into one of these cellars and let your eyes adjust, and you will see the whole winter laid out in front of you. Wooden crates of potatoes, kept in the dark so they do not turn green. Bins of carrots and beets and turnips, buried in damp sand so they stay firm and crisp for months. Cabbages wrapped in paper, apples spread out on slatted shelves, never touching, because one bad apple really will spoil the whole barrel. Onions and garlic braided into long ropes and hung from the beams where the air moves freely. Squash and pumpkins lined up like soldiers along a plank. Everything has its place, and every place has a reason behind it, learned over generations of watching what lasts and what does not. The old-timers will tell you the rules as if they are reciting scripture, because in a way they are. Store your dry-loving crops like onions and squash up high where it is a touch warmer and drier. Store your moisture-loving crops like carrots and beets down low in the damp sand. Never wash a vegetable before you store it because that thin layer of soil is protection, and the water you add is an invitation to mold. Keep the light out, keep the air moving, and check on everything with your own 2 hands, once a week, pulling out anything that is starting to turn before it can take its neighbors down with it. It is not complicated, but it works, and it has worked for a very, very long time. Now, a root cellar is perfect for keeping vegetables alive and sleeping, but it does not solve the whole puzzle. What about the tomatoes, the beans, the corn, the peaches, the berries, all the tender things that come rushing in during the summer and would rot in a matter of days? For that, the Amish turn to the method that fills more shelves than any other: canning. If you have ever walked into an Amish pantry in the fall, the first thing that stops you in your tracks is the glass. Hundreds and hundreds of jars, catching the light, standing in neat rows on shelves that climb all the way to the ceiling. Deep red tomatoes, golden peaches, green beans, dark purple grape juice, ruby beets, amber apple butter. It looks less like a pantry and more like a wall of jewels. And every single jar is shelf-stable, safe to eat, for a year or longer, sitting at plain old room temperature. The idea behind canning is beautifully simple, even if the work is real. You pack the food into a glass jar. You heat it up, hot enough and long enough to kill off the tiny organisms that cause spoilage. And as the jar cools, the lid pulls down and seals itself with a soft little pop, locking out every speck of new air and every new germ. Nothing can get in, and so nothing can spoil. That jar of peaches is, in a sense, frozen in time, not by cold, but by heat and by that perfect airtight seal. The Amish know that different foods need different care, and they do not cut corners on this, because getting it wrong is dangerous. High-acid foods, like most fruits, tomatoes, pickles, and jams, can be safely put up in a simple boiling water bath, the jars fully covered with bubbling water for a set stretch of time. But the low-acid foods, the green beans, the corn, the carrots, and above all the meats, those demand more heat than boiling water can give. For those, the Amish use a pressure canner, a heavy pot with a locking lid that raises the temperature high enough to make the food truly safe for long storage. This is not folklore or guesswork. It is careful, tested, time-honored practice, and every Amish girl learns it at her mother's elbow, standing on a stool by a steaming kettle, long before she is old enough to have a kitchen of her own. Canning season is one of the great rhythms of Amish life. When the garden comes in all at once in late summer, the whole family bends to the work. The kitchen turns into a factory of steam and glass and the smell of vinegar and simmering fruit. Bushels of tomatoes become quart after quart of sauce for the winter's noodles and stews. Cucumbers become pickles. Cabbage and peppers become relish. Berries become jam that will sweeten 1,000 breakfasts when the ground is frozen solid outside. It is hot, hard, joyful work, and by the time the last jar cools and pops on the counter, the family has quite literally sealed away the summer to open again in the dead of winter. There is one more way the Amish keep vegetables, and it may be the oldest of them all: fermentation. Now that word sounds like a laboratory, but it is really the simplest thing in the world, and your own ancestors did it in a stone crock in the corner of the kitchen. The idea is this: you take fresh cabbage or cucumbers or beans and you pack them down under salt and their own juices, and you let nature do the rest. The good bacteria that live naturally on the vegetable begin to work, turning the sugars into a mild, sour acid. And that acid does two remarkable things at once. It preserves the food for months, and it makes it healthier than it ever was to begin with. Shredded cabbage packed with a little salt becomes sauerkraut, and a crock of sauerkraut in a cool cellar will keep all winter long, growing tangier and more complex as the months go by. Cucumbers dropped into a barrel of salty brine, with a few sprigs of dill and a clove of garlic, become the crisp, sour pickles that no store-bought jar has ever quite matched. The beauty of fermentation is that it asks almost nothing of you. No heat, no jars to seal, no fuel to burn. You simply give the vegetables salt and thyme and a cool, dark corner, and the invisible work of 1,000 tiny helpers turns a fleeting summer crop into food that lasts and does you good besides. To an Amish family, a crock of kraut bubbling quietly in the cellar is not a science experiment. It is just another way the earth keeps its promises. But a family cannot live on vegetables and fruit alone. They need meat. And meat is the hardest thing of all to keep without cold. This is where the Amish reach for methods older than almost any other. Methods that once kept entire armies and empires fed. The first of these is salt. Salt has an almost magical power over spoilage. It pulls the moisture right out of meat, and without moisture, the organisms that cause rot simply cannot live. So a fresh ham or a slab of pork belly is packed in salt, sometimes for weeks, sometimes rubbed and re-rubbed, until it is cured all the way through and can hang in a cool room for months without ever going bad. This is where our bacon and our country hams first came from. not from a factory, but from a farmer with a barrel of salt and the patience to wait. The second method is smoke. After the salt has done its work, many cuts of meat are moved to the smokehouse, a small wooden building where a low, cool, smoky fire burns for days. The smoke does two things at once. It dries the meat further, and it coats it in natural compounds that fight off spoilage and keep insects away. It also happens to taste incredible, which is why smoked ham and smoked sausage are still treasured long after we stop needing them to survive the winter. Walk past an Amish smokehouse in butchering season, and the whole yard smells of hickory and applewood, and inside, in the fragrant gloom, hang the hams and the bacons and the sausages that will carry the family through until spring. A single good ham, cured and smoked this way, can hang in the cool for the better part of a year, and every slice off it tastes of the care that went into it. And there's a third trick with meat, one that surprises a lot of people: fat. When you cook meat slowly and then pack it down under a thick, sealed layer of its own rendered fat or lard, you create a barrier that air cannot cross. The French have a fancy name for this, but the Amish grandmother just calls it putting the meat down in the crock. Sausages fried and submerged in lard will keep in a cool cellar for months, tender and ready, waiting for a hungry family on a cold morning. Between salt, smoke, and fat, an Amish family can turn one autumn butchering into a whole year of meat on the table, and never once need a freezer to do it. Now let me show you one of the most charming and clever tricks of all, and it solves the trickiest problem in the whole kitchen: milk. Fresh milk is one of the fastest things in the world to spoil, and a farm with cows has a lot of it, every single day. So what do you do with gallons of fresh milk and no refrigerator? The Amish have an answer for that too, and it is called a spring house. A spring house is a small stone building, often no bigger than a garden shed, built right over the top of a natural spring or a cold-running creek. That cold water is channeled through a shallow stone trough inside, and it flows past all day and all night, never stopping, always cool. Set your crocks of milk and your jars of cream and your rolls of butter right down into that running water, and the constant flow of cold spring water keeps them fresh, the same way a cold stream would keep a bottle chilled on a summer hike. It is refrigeration powered entirely by gravity and geography. Nature does all the work, for free, forever. But even a spring house cannot keep milk fresh indefinitely, and the Amish do not waste a single drop. So most of that milk is turned into things that keep far longer than milk ever could. The cream is churned into butter, and butter, salted and packed into a crock, lasts a very long time in a cool cellar. The milk is set out to sour on purpose into a thick, tangy clabber, or drained into soft cheese, or pressed and aged into hard cheese that grows better with every passing month. Nothing is thrown away. The whey left over from cheese making goes to the pigs. The buttermilk left from churning goes into the next batch of biscuits and pancakes. In an Amish kitchen, milk is not a thing that spoils. It is a thing that transforms, again and again, into a dozen foods that all outlast it. Then there is the egg, and the way the Amish keep eggs is one of those small pieces of old wisdom that sounds almost like a magic trick until you understand it. A fresh egg, straight from the hen and never washed, comes with its own natural protective coating, a very thin layer that seals the shell and keeps air and germs out. If you never wash that coating away, an egg will keep for weeks in a cool pantry with no special care at all. But the Amish take it one step further for the long haul. To store eggs for the whole winter, when the hens slow down and stop laying, they use a method called water glassing. The clean, unwashed eggs are lowered into a crock filled with a simple mineral solution that seals the shells completely and keeps out every trace of air. Down in that crock, in the cool of the cellar, farm-fresh eggs will keep for 6 months or more, ready to be lifted out and cracked into a pan long after the hens have gone quiet for the season. One crock, one winter's worth of eggs, and not a watt of power anywhere in sight. And then, holding this whole beautiful system together, there is the simplest category of all, the dry goods. Not everything needs cold or salt or a seal. Some of the most important foods a family eats just need to be kept dry and dark and safe from mice. The Amish keep flour and cornmeal and rolled oats in big metal bins with tight lids. They keep dried beans and split peas and lentils, which will last for years, in glass jars and cloth sacks. They dry their own sweet corn and their own apples and their own herbs, hanging in the attic or spread on screens in the sun, shrinking them down into light, tough, concentrated food that takes up almost no room and never goes bad. A handful of dried apples in January tastes like a whole orchard in the fall, and a shelf of dried beans and grains is quiet, humble insurance against any hard season that might come. There's one last thing I want you to understand, because without it, all the crocks and jars and cellars in the world would still fail, and that is the discipline of tending. A full pantry is not a thing you build once and forget. It is a living thing, and it has to be watched. In an Amish home, the pantry has a keeper, usually the mother of the house, and she knows what is on every shelf the way a captain knows his ship. She practices what our grandparents called first in, first out. The oldest jars come forward to be used first, and the newest go to the back, so that nothing is ever left to sit until it is too old. She dates her lids in pencil. She walks the cellar with a lantern once a week in the cold months, turning the apples, feeling the potatoes for soft spots, lifting the lid on the kraut, running her hand along the hams. Anything beginning to turn is caught early and used at once, before it can spread. Nothing is allowed to hide in a dark corner and go to waste. This quiet, patient tending is the thread that holds the whole system together. The methods keep the food, but the keeper keeps the methods. And a child who grows up watching a mother move through that cellar, calm and sure, learns something no grocery store can ever teach. That food is precious, that waste is a kind of sin, and that a family's security is something you build with your own hands, one jar at a time. They even keep their drinks this way. The apples that do not go into the cellar or onto the drying screens are pressed into cider, and that cider, left to work in a cool barrel, becomes vinegar, sharp and clean, that goes right back into the pickling crock to help preserve the next season's harvest. Round and round it goes, nothing bought, nothing wasted, every part of the farm feeding some other part, in a circle that is turned for generations. Now, if you have been listening closely, you may have noticed something that ties all of this together, something more important than any single method. It is the rhythm. An Amish pantry is not filled in a weekend, and it is not filled by one person. It is filled slowly, all year long, by a whole family working with the seasons instead of against them. In the spring, there is planting, and the first tender greens, and the cellar shelves are running low, but the garden is coming to the rescue. In the high summer, the work comes in a flood. The garden gives more than any family could eat fresh, and so the canning kettle never seems to cool, and the drying screens are always full, and the children are sent out at dawn to pick before the heat. In the fall comes the great gathering. The root crops come up out of the ground and go down into the cellar. The apples are pressed and dried and turned to butter. And when the weather finally turns cold enough, the neighbors come together for the butchering. Whole families arriving at first light, the men at the smokehouse and the women at the kettles. Everyone working, everyone talking, the children carrying wood, until by nightfall the meat is salted and smoked and put down for the winter. It is not a chore done alone in secret. It is a celebration, a coming together, a shared and cheerful labor that has bound these communities together for generations. And then comes the winter and the reward. The family sits at a warm table and eats, night after night, from shelves they filled with their own hands, tasting the summer in every jar. That rhythm, that steady turning of the year, is the real engine behind the whole pantry. The methods are only tools. The rhythm is the life. So step back for a moment and look at the whole picture. Look at what this family has built. There is the root cellar, using the steady cool of the earth to keep the vegetables sleeping. There are the hundreds of canned jars, using heat and a seal to lock the summer's harvest in glass. There is the salt and the smoke and the lard, turning one butchering into a year of meat. There is the spring house, using cold running water to keep the dairy fresh, and the butter and cheese that carry the milk even further. There are the water-glassed eggs, waiting patiently in their crock, and the bins of dried beans and grains standing guard against a hungry winter. Not one of these methods needs a wall socket. Not one of them can break down in a storm, or fail in a blackout, or send a bill at the end of the month. Together they form a pantry that is not just full, but genuinely secure, in a way that a refrigerator, for all its convenience, has never once been. And here is the part that I think matters the most, the part that goes deeper than potatoes and hams and jars of peaches. The Amish are not doing this because they are stuck in the past, or because they cannot afford a refrigerator. Most of them could buy one tomorrow if they wished. They keep their pantries this way on purpose, because a home that can feed itself through any winter without depending on the power grid, without depending on the store, without depending on anything but its own two hands and the land under its feet, is a home that is truly free. There is a deep and quiet peace in walking down into a cellar in the middle of January and seeing shelves that are still full, knowing that whatever happens outside, your family will eat. That peace is something most of us traded away without ever noticing, the day we decided the refrigerator would remember for us. The beautiful thing is that none of this is lost, and none of it is out of reach. Every single one of these methods, the root cellar, the canning, the curing, the fermenting, the dry storage, was once ordinary knowledge in nearly every household in the world. Your own great-grandparents almost certainly knew most of it. It was not secret then, and it is not secret now. It was simply set down and forgotten in the rush toward convenience. But it can be picked back up. You do not need a farm or a spring or 100 acres. A cool closet, a few shelves, a handful of jars, a sack of onions kept in the dark, a dozen eggs left unwashed. You can start with a single method this very week and feel, just a little, that same old piece of a pantry that does not depend on the hum in the corner. The Amish never needed a fridge because they never stopped remembering how to live without one. And maybe the real secret of that old pantry is not any single trick at all. Maybe it is the simple, stubborn, comforting idea that a family can still take care of itself, straight from the earth, the way families always have. Thank you for coming along with me and letting me show you this quiet, remarkable way of keeping a year of food alive with no refrigerator at all. If you would like to try it in your own home, I have put together a complete plain language guide to every one of these methods, step by step, and you will find it waiting for you down in the description below.